Without further ado, the Minister from the Northwest Territories, Mr. Wally Schumann.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for everyone for coming here this afternoon and for your interest in the Northwest Territories. Before I get too deep into this, I want to give you a brief introduction to our territory. The Northwest Territory is amongst Canada's largest jurisdictions. For those of you that don't know the layout of Canada, we're one-third at the top of the northern part of our country. We have 1.3 million square kilometers of land and the total population of a small city. With my opportunity to be here in London, I'd say about 2 square blocks would be our population. What we lack in population, we make up for resources. Our region economy was built by prospectors and investors who fund them, and they keep coming back because our geology is amongst the highest potential in the world. We have nearly a century of continuous mining, and it begins with metals like zinc, lead, gold, and later we became the birthplace of what I call Canadian diamonds. Today we produce more than $2 billion in value from our world-leading diamond industry. And in a difficult exploration market, we've seen an uptick in claim staking, a testament to the continuing attractiveness of our jurisdiction. That said, most of the territory lies above the Arctic Circle. And for those of you that haven't been there, that means that our climate can be harsh and unforgiving. As a government, our tax base is limited, so it's hard for our government to invest in projects alone, and that's why we're here today. We recognize that the competition for exploration and development dollars is strong. With the realities I just explained, it begs the question, how does the NWT expect to compete? The answer comes down to what we call the NWT difference. It's at the core of who we are. To understand our unique edge on mineral exploration and development, you first need to know 2 things. The first thing you need to know is that NWT has an extraordinary wealth of resources. We're about way more than diamonds. We're seeing a resurgence in interest in gold and base metals that established our territory. Perhaps the most exciting we have are the resources needed to power the green economy of the future. As the federal government derives its agenda of innovation and technology, attention is growing on the Northwest Territory's strategic and technical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. And with a long-standing history on strong governance and an 80-year history of collaboration with the mining sector, these resources come with a kind of politically stable and investment security elusive in many jurisdictions, and with this kind of potential. The second thing you need to know is our Northerners support mining. This is one thing I'd like to talk about. And my notes don't have all the specifics here, but a year ago we had a survey done by a very large group in Canada that surveyed the residents of the Northwest Territories. And one thing is quite clear, 86% of our residents believe in a strong mining sector and the vital long-term health of it. 82% want to see mining projects continue in the Northwest Territories. NWT residents and businesses support mining because they're an important part of our mining sector. The other thing that my notes don't say is the mining sector is up to 25% of our GDP of our whole territory. Mining has driven the NWT economy for a long time. Many of today's world leaders worked in mines and the exploration sector, and then when diamond mines arrived, the natural evolution to get involved was the case. Indigenous governments in our territory also have a vested interest, with many of them settled modern land claim agreements. They share in resource royalties paid by our mines and are part of our co-management regulatory system. There is a defined structure through which our government works with our Indigenous governments and communities, and a clear path to communication and negotiation for industry stakeholders. Until 2014, our natural resources were managed by the Government of Canada. So in 2014, we took over. It left us with policies and legislations that didn't make sense for our territory and those doing business there. With the reins firmly now in our hands, we are changing that. This change is guided by our mineral development strategy. We are drafting new mineral resource legislation to address the need for a modern, clear, competitive laws that respond to the needs of the NWT, and this is a big step forward for our territory. We're invested in making new relevant geoscience available. This includes reports on the geochemistry of the Slave Geological Province, which is one of the highest potential regions in Canada. And I have to stick it in here because I always say it everywhere I go. I believe it's bigger than the Abitibi bill. Our government has a $1 million mining incentive program available to prospectors and exploration companies carrying out mineral exploration in our territory. For many, that might not seem like a lot, but for our territory, that is a significant amount and helps the juniors be able to participate in exploration. We are committed to building a workforce that is employable through the mineral industry through our ECE's Skills for Success program. We have created a unique approach to mineral exploration development to NWT. It is based on the fundamental fact that Northerners want new mines, as I've said, and our economy needs new mines, and that buy-in is essential, driving the development forward. Our approach is built on partnership with industry stakeholders and Indigenous governments that make up our territory. It's built on mutual respect and recognition that each of us can contribute to the success of other two and maximize the benefits. Through our social economic agreements established by our government with mining companies and 25 years of working together, we have built this ecosystem of well-trained local workers and mine service companies proven to keep world-class mines on track. Our people are seeing real, tangible reasons to stay in school and seek higher learning. They're doing more than taking labor jobs at the mines. They're going to university in the south and coming back schooled in mining-related fields like engineering and geoscience. Our Indigenous governments own and operate the companies that service the mines, creating a robust Indigenous business community. They own and construct logistics and transportation companies. Some have expanded beyond our territory to the service industries in Alberta and across Canada. This I'd like to spend maybe a couple of seconds on. Just to give you the context, what the 3 diamond mines spent in the Northwest Territory since 1996, they've spent roughly $19 billion in procurement. $13 billion of that was spent with northern companies, and approximately $6 billion of that was spent with Aboriginal corporations. So it gives you an idea how successful these people are. In closing, mining is allowing our people to take control of their future. It provides thousands of jobs to Northerners where otherwise there would be none. It is inspiring youth to stay in school and aspire to have better jobs and even careers. Mining revenues are empowering and shaping Indigenous governments, businesses, and communities. And that's the NWT difference. And why should it matter to you? Because it means that you've laid the groundwork for our residents to want to work with you as much as we do. And then you can invest in attracting resources anywhere. But if you want to do it in a security and a territory where your investment will empower our people and inspire their future, come and invest in the Northwest Territories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Schumann. So I'd like to introduce Editor-in-Chief of the Northern Miner. He's getting some water. He's a little parched. Here's John Cumming to lead the panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. And let's jump into the Northwest Territories here. We have a very experienced crew here, 4 geologists, so I may just ask you a bunch of geology questions. But went from my near right to the far right. We have Tom Jensen. He's the Deputy Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment, appointed in the summer of 2016. And he voted with his feet. He was a long time, anyone who's been in BC knows Tom, long time civil servant in BC and moved up to the territories. So there's a vote of confidence in a new government and the new challenges. Immediately, we've heard from Robin Goad a couple times for the past few days. He's President and CEO of Fortune Minerals with their NICO project, nickel, cobalt, bismuth, copper. And then we got Ken Armstrong. He's the President and CEO of North Arrow Minerals, diamond explorer, and very experienced in the diamond industry. We have Joseph Campbell. He's the Chairman and CEO of TerraX Minerals. They have their Yellowknife City gold project just on the outskirts of town there in Yellowknife. And at the very end, we've heard from Michael as well. Michael J. Byron, he's the President and CEO of Nighthawk Gold with their very large Colomac gold property in the Northwest Territories. And if I could just reiterate something you said, Wally, everyone should understand in London now that when you come to the territories, you're basically dealing with a provincial government. They have all the, for the most part, the powers of a provincial government. Offshore oil and gas is a different story, but on the plus side, you have all the advantages of a small group of people. Here we have the mines minister, essentially here, ready to speak to anyone. So you get the best of both worlds in the Northwest Territories. But maybe just, Tom, if you could just give us a run through. Pam at the very beginning was mentioning this morning the diamond industry of the Northwest Territories is the base of the pyramid. And there's been a lot of changes over the last 2 years in ownership and expansions and new mines. Just what has gone on in the diamond industry, where so much British money has gone into with the past couple decades.
So, sorry, the question.
Sorry,
what's
an
going
update on what has happened in the diamond industry the last 2 or 3 years that everyone should know about.
Okay, well, there's a lot that has actually happened. One of the things that happened most recently was the Washington group from the United States purchased Dominion Diamond, which means they own 100% of the Acadie mine, and just looking at Pam, but she told me to move it closer to me, but anyway. Which means they own 40% of the mine that's 60% owned by Rio Tinto, the diamond mine. So they've become a real big player in the Northwest Territories in terms of diamond production. One of the things that's really good about that is in the discussions that there's two things that are good about that. One, they've recently appointed Patrick Evans as the CEO to run the mine, run the corporation, and he has a significant experience in diamonds and exploration in the territory, as being the former CEO of Mountain Province Diamonds, which is a partner with De Beers on our most recent mine that was opened called Gatchel Quay. So there's a partnership there that Patrick was very involved in on the exploration side. And what the signal for us, and at least the language that we're hearing from the Washington group, is that what that means is that they are very interested in expanding the mine life of Acadie as well. And they're talking about numbers out to 2045. So very significant developments. And the other thing that's going on is a very robust drilling program going on at Kennedy Diamonds, who are also connected to Mountain Province. So there's a lot going on still in terms of diamonds, and we've been supported by diamonds for the last 20 years, and we have 3 operating. But what's very interesting, and I have to get this in here, John, what's very, very interesting, what we're seeing is when we look at the exploration numbers, we're now seeing a shift towards the base metals and precious metals. So what's going to be happening over the coming decade is a diversification of the mining sector in the Northwest Territories based on where we see the shift in the mining exploration, and these gentlemen are the folks that are doing it. So and then I'm sure they can tell you more about that, and already have in some of their presentations. So thanks, John.
Right. Now, of course, one of the first questions when you think of territories is the infrastructure, and what kind of support is there for infrastructure building. And just Michael and Robin, you both touched on the new road and the infrastructure. If you could just speak to that issue, the importance of infrastructure, what's going on?
Sure. I'll start. I guess the first challenge, of course, is with the Northwest Territory. We have world-class mineral potential. The trick to operating in the territory is obviously infrastructure, because you have to be able to get your product out to market. So costs of mines for operating in the Northwest Territories are sometimes 2 times higher than in southern localities, and the operating costs are obviously higher as well. That's offset by world-scale projects, and actually every project that's at the table here is a district-scale opportunity. So you're not just looking at a small deposit, you're looking at an IOCG district for my project, diamonds, you've got gold assets that are actually entire districts which are tied up. So the key obviously is the development of infrastructure. Our project is a concentrate has to be delivered south for refining, so we need an opportunity to get that material to market, which is roads. So the federal government, the Northwest Territories governments are co-funding a road to a community. Our company is leveraging off that and extending that road from the community up to our project site, which is another 50 kilometers. And this, of course, is a segue to eventual extension of that road up into other communities. It's also reducing the cost of winter road maintenance, basically, for the northern communities that are north of our project, And presumably, if the Nighthawk project were to advance to a development stage, then it's a segue up into to that project as well. So I'd like to look at this as sort of, again, leveraging the symbiotic relationship between mining, communities, and also the government in the Northwest Territories. We have an infrastructure project that's actually being funded from a variety of different sources for the benefit of the communities, for the benefit of the projects, power generation, all kinds of economic opportunities coming from the road that the governments are now funding.
Right. And Michael?
Yeah, clearly infrastructure is important if you're an explorer. As you know, our camps get more and more, our mining camps get more and more mature, you have to start looking farther afield to be prepared to drill some awful deep holes. And just the inherent cost of exploration is more, so you tend to find more remote deposits have to be more robust, so you put together a larger package. You can't run with a small asset in a logistically challenged jurisdiction. So for us, getting into the area, we knew we had to consolidate a large regional play around a former producer. But for logistics-wise, as Robin said, I mean, once that Talicho access road to Wati is built, it cuts about 100 kilometers off of access up to our area. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't until we got our hands on the Comac asset, is the federal government calculated that there was about 100 kilometers of waste rock at Comac that was benign that they could use for a foundation for a road. So even though we're a little more remote, there are some synergies. So for me, I've always said if we can get any of these operations over the hump, there's the political will, and it seems like the economic will across all levels of government to build infrastructure. And coming from trying to work in northern areas of Ontario where that wasn't existent, and we left. We started up there with Aurora Platte and the Lakeshore Gold, and basically couldn't generate any sort of opportunities along those fronts. And so I've often done, I think I told Wally too, it's very refreshing to get into a jurisdiction where everyone's aligned, and it makes everyone's job easier. So I'm a big fan of infrastructure builds. I don't have a big bank account. I won't be handing out too much, but I certainly will be there to benefit from it.
Right. And there's other kinds of assistance the government can provide. I guess with the de-evolution, you had federal civil servants just basically crossing the street and becoming civil servants in the Northwest Territories. And one other sort of a small thing but important was the geoscience group of the Northwest Territories government built a new 900 square meter core shack and viewing area, and that was something Joseph you found useful. Is that correct, with the TerraX? And maybe speak to that.
Well, it was almost the other way around. We arrived onto our project in 2013, and we took over a large position that had been part of one of the former operating mines. And at the time we went to the territory, one of the things we wanted to look at for was data, because the property we bought, we had none. And the Geoscience Center had taken the archives out of the giant mine, and that's where we found all of our data. And at that point, we realized there was about 360 some holes that had been drilled on the property, so obviously that was of great interest to us. And we went to the giant mine site, which was being cleaned up, and it continues to be cleaned up. They had a core facility there. And in that core facility, we found 37,000 meters of core from our property. So we quickly moved that off into our own core facility and began, within weeks of being on the property, we began to relog and resample core to great benefit. We had some wonderful intersections in that core. And on the basis of that success, I should sort of give a little segue. We took that core off the site because at the time it was going to be bulldozed into the ground as part of the cleanup. And so in discussions with the Geoscience Center, we sort of made them realize what a benefit this core was for us. It was literally $10+ million worth of exploration benefit that just fell into our hands for virtually no cost other than the cost of moving it. And on that basis, they approached the territorial government and federal governments and said the money has to be put in to try to preserve this core. And we wrote a letter in support of that. And at the end of the day, the money was made available and the core facility was built. And now it'll be of great benefit to anybody that's exploring in the territory as we move forward. And as a side note, we increased the size of our property over the years, and there's probably about another 5,000 or 6,000 meters of core that's now in that facility that's on parts of the property that we have recently acquired. And so we're very much looking forward to getting into that core and having a look at it and re-logging and resampling it.
Right. And Ken, let's bring you in here. I'd like to hear your comments on the diamond potential of the NWT. You have projects in different jurisdictions. Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious just from some of the numbers that have been quoted already. It's the Lac de Gras discoveries really made the Canadian diamond industry, and it is sort of the real birthplace of all of the discoveries that happened in Canada. Really germinated there, and that's when a lot of the exploration expertise was developed within the junior mining sector, as well as bringing in major miners that had never even mined diamonds before, developed their expertise and the ability to discover these deposits. North Arrow, we're still exploring in this area largely because we know, although we did very well, we weren't that good and we didn't find everything the first go-around. And there's, I think, a real opportunity for additional discovery, and I think that the part of the impetus for that'll help lead to more discovery flows from the fact of devolution. I think it's been a really important aspect in the development and the maturation of the Northwest Territories. The fact that now the local government and decisions are being made out of Yellowknife and not from Ottawa is hugely important. We, as a small explorer, have benefited from the Mineral Incentive Program, which Minister Schumann mentioned in his words. We just completed a drilling program at Lac de Gras last month and discovered a kimberlite, and I'm pretty sure it's the first discovery of a kimberlite there in the last 6 years. And that was benefited from investment from the Mineral Incentive Program, and I think in the end that grant would have covered about 20% of our cost of that program. So a very significant portion of that. Tying in actually with the core facility, we also were able to take advantage of that because having a camp in the Lac de Gras area in March is an expensive proposition to keep it open, and that costs money. So as we actually brought our drill core back to Yellowknife and logged it there, and now the remainder of the core that we haven't sampled is actually being stored in the facility. So there's a real sort of benefits from these initiatives that the government has been putting into place. The opening of the Gachikwe mine by De Beers in the southern part of the Slave, I think, underscores the fact that it's not just the Lac de Gras area that is prospective within the territory. There are, and the success that Kennedy had actually in advancing the Kelvin kimberlite, going in as a junior company, drilling off a deposit that really no other major would have put the number of holes in, the amount of evaluation that went into that project. I think it's a pretty phenomenal evaluation effort that has now been reabsorbed by Mountain Province, which is the co-owner of Gachikwe. I think all of that just underscores the ongoing potential and the fact that I think diamonds are going to be the base of the pyramid for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's talk a bit about Aboriginal relations. And the way I understand it, we have if you come to the Northwest Territories, you have to deal with regulatory boards that are independent of government. These are controlled by local First Nations and other communities. So if you're a mining company coming to the territory, you don't just deal with the government, you deal with these boards. Tom, if you could just explain the structures of these, and I'm not sure if any of you four could maybe give a case study of dealing with First Nations issues. But first, just Tom, if you could explain the structure that I believe the government now says is a model for the rest of Canada.
Okay, thanks, John. So the Mackenzie Valley Review Board is the board that's responsible for the environmental assessments and other permits. Under that, there's a regional structure, so they actually are connected in the sense that, so I wouldn't necessarily call them independent. So what we have is still a federal piece of legislation which is going to be over time devolved. We have a commitment in the devolution agreement to devolve that responsibility and that authority to the territory in the future. Under that, we have regional boards that have many members who are Aboriginal on them. So in the sense that they're not independent, but they're still creatures of the legislation. So we call it co-management, and what it means is that the Aboriginal leadership is in the process early on, in the approval process, as opposed to intervening in a process. So it's very different in that sense, and I think it is a model for the country, and it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily any less. It's very rigorous, so it's robust. It needs to be, because our regulatory framework still needs to make sure that everything is done in an environmentally sustainable way, that there are socioeconomic benefits. But it's clear, and there is Aboriginal involvement, which I think makes a huge difference in terms of the ultimate process and getting to a place where the permits and the environmental assessment reviews are done.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should credit the diamond industry as well for being pathfinders and leaders in Aboriginal engagement. And in particular, the diamond mines are very significant contributors to the economy of the Northwest Territories. Minister Schumann's already pointed to the 25% of GDP directly attributed to mining, and that's about 40% when you also include the service industry that supports the mining industry. So the Aboriginal communities have benefited from the mining industry immensely. Most of the there's new companies that have been formed to benefit from mining. I'd say that probably I think the majority of the employment is with Aboriginal communities. So when you came into our project, we had a lot of that pathway already paved by the diamond mining industry, but also our project was developed in conjunction at the same time as the Tlicho agreement was negotiated between the Northwest Territories government and the federal government, which basically has a settled land claim. Although our particular licenses are grandfathered, the Tlicho government owns the fee simple lands that surround our property. We're negotiating access agreements with the Tlicho government right now, but they've had a very positive experience with the mining that's been done to date, and that's something that's a benefit to companies like ours that are coming later.
Right. Any other experiences to share there?
I'd like to say when we first came into this project in 2013, one of the hurdles I had to get over from my board was a perception that the Northwest Territories was a difficult place to work. And I went up to Yellowknife prior to the purchase of our property and went into the regulator and talked to them. And all of these gentlemen have been in the business for a long time. And if you're going to work in a jurisdiction that mines responsibly, you have to realize that there's going to be a regulatory process. And I found nothing in the regulatory process that wasn't as good or even better than most of the other areas in Canada. And therefore, I convinced my board to go ahead with the purchase. When we began to explore, there was a lingering doubt in people of how we would push the project forward. And in my discussions with the regulatory board, to get a drill permit was a 42-day process. And I was rather taken back by that, because in many other jurisdictions it's a lot longer. And I had heard stories that it took a long time in the Northwest Territories. And the first permit we got it in 45 days. And the only reason it was not 42 days was because there was a shutdown in the online system for a couple of days because of a computer glitch. And we've had 2 other permits since, and every permit we've gotten within the 42-day limit. So there's a great regulatory system in place that you can work with and get your permits and move your projects forward.
I might just add in, for where North Arrow's at as sort of the really early stage of exploration, there's a level of sort of understanding and sophistication. I think it came out in the results of the survey that was referred to earlier, and the general support for mining and exploration. And so there is an understanding of what an early stage exploration single drill program, kind of like the one we just finished, would be, which is limited in scope, limited in employment opportunities, but there's an understanding that those are the kinds of projects that are required to make the next generation of discoveries that will become the major projects that then evolve into much bigger enterprises and have far more opportunities and really get into the meat and potatoes of discussing opportunities and economic benefits and so on. So there's that level of understanding and sophistication, I think, is important, and that you definitely see it in the Northwest Territories, and I think it's just because of the history of mining there that whole spectrum has been seen.
Right. And Tom, you want to jump back in here?
Yeah, thanks, John. I just wanted to just leverage off the discussion around Aboriginal involvement in the regulatory process. In the territories, the Aboriginal presence, the Aboriginal fact is much bigger than that. I came up from British Columbia, and I've been there for a couple of years now. And what's very different in the territory from other jurisdictions is that, for one thing, the majority of the population is Indigenous. So the Northwest Territories is actually an Indigenous place. It's not about how do we involve folks who are in a minority who are asserting title. There are 4 land claims across 60% of the territory. We're still negotiating 3 other land claims, which means we know on that 60% you know who the landlord is. It's not about asserting title. It's not about having to prove title. Figure out how strong that claim is, but it's rather they have fee simple title to that land, and so you know you're dealing with the landlord. I think that's very, very significant. And I know the minister always says this too, that I remind him that not only are there Aboriginal governments that we share royalties with on a 25% basis, but the government is in fact an Indigenous government. The government of Northwest Territories, 5 of 7 cabinet ministers are Indigenous people, and most of the MLAs, the majority of the MLAs, there's 19 of them, are Indigenous. So it's a different context. It's a different way of looking at the country. And when Prime Minister Trudeau talks about reconciliation, as my minister likes to remind me, is that we've been doing reconciliation for a very, very long time. We have a structure in place. We have procedures in place. We have ongoing relations with Indigenous governments through our Intergovernmental Council. So it's much more than involving Indigenous people in the regulatory framework in a way and having a role. It's really about, to me, it's about the place. And I can observe that being fairly new there and seeing how all of this is coming together. So I just wanted to share that, John, just to talk about the Aboriginal fact, if you will, or Indigenous fact of the territory.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left, but with all this geological brain power here, I know you have your individual projects, but can you just give a view of the full territory? What do you think of it? I see there's like Carlin-style indications of gold mineralization in the west, that kind of thing. Where do you see the exploration in the territory?
Closer to the beginning than the end, I would say. There's no doubt about that. I mean, again, if you look back, when we were drilling in the Sudbury camp, it wasn't uncommon to drill over a kilometer depth. And Timmins, when we were drilling off the Lakeshore deposit, we drilled it the deepest, about 1,500 meters. We drill 1 to 200 up at Colmac and even shallower elsewhere. So you can just see the level of exploration that's been done. And if you multiply that across the territory, and you throw in the fact that most of the greenstone terrains haven't been mapped at inch quarter-mile scale like they have in the rest of our jurisdiction, there's just it's kind of a blank slate. And what intrigued me when I first set foot up in the Indian Lake area in 2009 was at the grade of these deposits and the diversity of the deposit types. And it was the same age as the Timmins camp or any other prolific gold mining camp. Mm-hmm. But just there wasn't the level of exploration dollars and man hours spent. So that's why I say it's way closer to the beginning than the end. Like there's going to be discoveries made, there's no doubt. If you can keep sort of the landscape fertile, and as everyone alluded to, the permitting process goes a long way to do that, because if you haven't got money to compete with the other provinces, you can do it on paper, right, by making it easier for everyone to work.
Yes.
And fairer for everyone, and that's not just us, but all stakeholders. So I've enjoyed the last 9 years up there. Yeah. It's been a good ride for us so far.
I'd like to just add to that is we have a project that's right in the city of Yellowknife. So this is a camp that's been mined since the 30s and the 40s. And we're actively exploring on rock that if we were in Timmins, there'd be 50,000 drill holes in it. And every one of our discoveries so far sticks out of the ground. They're not difficult discoveries. We're not going deep. We're not using sophisticated geophysics. These are gold showings that come straight out of the ground, and we just drill holes underneath them. So, as was pointed out, this is early days, even for the heart of the belt in Yellowknife.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. But I should say one other thing is Wally and Tom are also responsible for tourism, and I learned that one new phenomenon in the Northwest Territories is the rise of Chinese tourism. So the things they come for are the northern lights, fresh air, fishing, dog sledding, and the rare experience of being alone, where they first take a picture of themselves. They take a picture of themselves being alone and then share that.
Did we say that?
John, we have time for one question.
Oh, okay. We'll have time for one question if there's a...
Can you explain the incentive program? We got a little bit of money for an incentive program. Can you explain that?
Yeah, we have $1 million available for providing to explorers or companies. So we have for prospectors, we'll provide up to $25,000 to do their work and prospect in the territory, and for corporations, we will offer up to $200,000 with matching funds.
The prospectors can get 50,000.
25.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, and we also look at there's innovation is actually a criteria as well. So we got to look at what's the project and what kind of what methods are being used and that kind of thing. But what we found is it's interesting. Well, Ken talked about it, but what we found was we're leveraging, like the Yukon panel, we're leveraging say $3 to every one or $3.50 to every dollar that we're putting in by seeding that exploration through that program. So it doesn't sound like a heck of a lot of money in totality, but small money can lead to big finds, as they say. So.
How many people got that this year?
I'm not sure. I can follow up with you if you want, for sure. Yeah.
Application deadline's Monday. Get on it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, guys. And I should say I saw a headline this morning looking through the press releases, world wine output falls to 60-year low. So be sure to grab a bottle of wine as a thank you on your way out there.